It started with a dream of rain and mud and blood. A man was being dragged, his shirt torn, a crimson flower blooming across his chest where they'd hit him. Rough hands pulled him toward a wooden platform, a place of shame, where other men waited with chains and cold calculating ledgers. And behind him, a little boy, no older than 7 or 8, was screaming a single word, his voice cracking with a desperation that tore right through you. "Father!" The rain just fell harder, washing the blood into the mud. A memory erased before it could even set. Josephine Hartwell woke up with a gasp, her hand flying to her swollen belly. Sweat soaked her nightgown, even with the autumn chill seeping through the cracks in her cabin walls. It was the 3rd time this week, the 3rd time she'd seen the man in the rain, the 3rd time she'd heard that little boy's cry. Each time it felt more real, more urgent, like a ghost rattling a chain, demanding to be heard. In the pale moonlight, her eyes fell on the photograph beside her bed. Thomas, her husband. His kind eyes seemed to watch her from the sepia-toned picture, taken just months before consumption stole him from her. "You're calling me to them again, aren't you?" she whispered, her fingers trembling as she touched the cool glass. 6 months a widow, 6 months with child. And here she was in a forgotten cabin on the edge of Millbrook, Missouri, a world away from the St. Louis society that had cast her out. They'd turned their backs on her after Thomas's controversial ideas, the wild notion that the children of freed slaves deserved an education just like anyone else. She was far from everything she'd ever known, everything except the life growing inside her, the one thing that kept her tethered to this world. Josie lit the small oil lamp, its flickering flame pushing back the shadows. She reached for Thomas's Bible. The leather was worn smooth from his hands, the pages filled with his careful, steady notes. She let the book fall open where it would, a little game she played, letting fate guide her. Her finger landed on Isaiah 61, a verse Thomas had underlined so heavily the ink nearly bled through the page. "The Spirit of the Lord God is upon me, because the Lord has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives." The captives. Thomas used to say that word wasn't just about physical chains. Sometimes the heaviest chains are the ones you can't see. Injustice, ignorance, fear. The baby inside her kicked, a strong, insistent thump, as if agreeing with its father's memory. It was still hours before dawn. Josie moved to the cabin's only window, kneeling awkwardly on the rough wooden floor. The waning moon cast a silver light over the small garden she'd managed to coax from the stubborn Missouri soil. In the distance, the town of Millbrook slept, quiet and unknowing. "Thomas," she prayed, her voice barely a whisper. "If this dream is you, if you're guiding me, then help me understand. Who is this man? Why does his son's cry feel like a knife in my own heart? What am I supposed to do?" The baby kicked again, harder this time. And with that kick came a sudden, sharp clarity. A feeling she hadn't had since Thomas died. Tomorrow was the monthly labor auction in Millbrook, a day when men who couldn't pay their debts were sold like cattle to the highest bidder. Something told her she had to be there. No, not something, everything. Millbrook's town square was a different beast on auction day. The usual quiet was gone, replaced by a restless, hungry energy. Townsfolk gathered around the wooden platform in front of the courthouse, their eyes sharp. Men in worn, dusty clothes stood in a line, their gazes fixed on the ground, while men with coin in their pockets looked them over, sizing up their muscle, their worth. Josie pulled her shawl tighter, feeling every eye on her. A woman, and a pregnant one at that, was a rare sight at these gatherings. The $5 in her pocket, the very last of her savings, felt like a burning coal against her thigh. She still wasn't sure why she'd brought it, or what she was even doing here. All she knew was that the dream had pulled her here, and she had to see it through. "Quite the spectacle, isn't it, Mrs. Hartwell?" Dr. Benjamin Clemens appeared at her side, his medical bag in hand. The Old Town doctor had been kind to her, checking on her pregnancy without ever asking for a fee she couldn't pay. "It's a cruel custom," Josie replied, her voice tight. She watched as a young man was sold to the blacksmith for 3 months of hard labor, all to cover a debt of $20. Dr. Clemens' face darkened. Cruel indeed, though some would call it justice. He lowered his voice. Speaking of which, I see Silas Hutchkins is gracing us with his presence today. Josie followed his gaze. She saw a tall, imposing man near the front of the crowd, dressed in a suit that cost more than her entire cabin. His eyes were cold, like chips of winter ice, and they moved over the crowd with a look that seemed to calculate profit from every man's misfortune. That had to be Hutchkins, the owner of the town bank. Does he often attend? She asked. Only when someone interesting is on the block, the doctor said, his voice laced with a meaning she couldn't quite grasp. Ah, and I believe our next lot is approaching now. The crowd parted, and two figures were led to the platform, a man and a small boy. The man's face was bruised, his shirt torn and stained with what looked horribly like dried blood. It was him, the man from her dream, her heart hammered against her ribs. Despite his battered state, he walked with a stubborn dignity, his hand resting protectively on the child's shoulder. Next up, the auctioneer boomed. Colt Maddox and Son, former ranch owner, strong back, good with animals. Defaulted on his bank loan after 2 seasons of drought. Starting bid is $50 for 6 months' labor, child included. The man Colt Maddox stood there, staring at a point just over the crowd's heads, refusing to meet their judging eyes. The boy beside him clutched something small to his chest, a little wooden horse Josie saw, carved with incredible detail. Who is he? She whispered to the doctor. Colt Maddox, Dr. Clemens murmured, had one of the finest cattle ranches in the county. Then his wife Sarah died last year. Consumption, like your Thomas. Left him with the boy Noah and a mountain of debt. Hutchkins foreclosed on his property 3 months ago. Just then, as if summoned, Silas Hutchkins stepped forward. A thin, cruel smile played on his lips. I'll start the bidding, he called out, his voice carrying across the silent square. $20. I could use a man to muck out my stables. A ripple of cruel laughter went through the crowd. It was a calculated insult. Offering a proud landowner, a man who'd once been respected, the most menial work for less than half the starting price, it was a public humiliation. And something inside Josie snapped. A fierce, protective fire ignited in her chest. She didn't think. She just acted. Her hand shot into the air. $5, she called out, her voice ringing out, stronger and clearer than she'd ever expected. The entire town square went dead silent. Every single head turned to stare at the pregnant widow standing alone at the back of the crowd. The auctioneer blinked, his mouth hanging open. Ma'am, the starting bid is $50. $5 for their freedom, Josie clarified, her gaze locking with Colt Maddox's for the first time. She saw his eyes widen. They were blue, the color of a summer sky, but now clouded with exhaustion and utter disbelief. Hutchkins let out a laugh that sounded like ice cracking. Mrs. Hartwell, isn't it? The little school teacher from St. Louis. This isn't a charity, my dear. These men have debts to pay. $5, Josie repeated, holding out the money, her hand shaking only slightly. It's all I have. But unlike you, Mr. Hutchkins, I don't intend to own them. I intend to free them. A murmur swept through the crowd, a wave of shock and whispers. The auctioneer looked from Josie to Hutchkins, a man caught between the town's iron-fisted banker and this sudden, unbelievable act of defiance. On the platform, the little boy Noah finally looked at Josie. His eyes, so like his father's, were filled with a dawning, innocent hope that pierced her straight to the soul. He whispered something to the little wooden horse in his hands, then nudged his father. Colt Maddox looked down at his son, then back to Josie, his face an unreadable mask of pride and confusion. Hutchkins strode toward her, his polished boots silent in the mud. He lowered his voice, a venomous hiss meant only for her. You're making a spectacle of yourself, Mrs. Hartwell. A woman in your condition, alone, penniless. Do you really want to draw this kind of attention? The threat was there, veiled but sharp as a razor. Josie lifted her chin. I believe this is a public auction, Mr. Hutchkins. Anyone may bid. For a fleeting second, the banker's smooth facade cracked, and she saw something ugly and furious underneath. Then it was gone, replaced by a tight, thin smile. By all means, then. $5 for the famous Colt Maddox and his mute son. Going once, the auctioneer called out, his voice uncertain. No one else bid. The crowd was still, a silent sea of faces. Whether it was out of respect for Josie's courage or simple shock, no one moved. Going twice, the auctioneer said, his eyes darting to Hutchkins, who gave a slight, dismissive nod. Sold to Mrs. Hartwell for $5. As the auctioneer took her money, the last of it, a strange mix of terror and rightness washed over Josie. What had she done? How on earth could she feed two more mouths when she could barely feed herself? But then they brought Colt and Noah down from the platform, and the boy looked up at her, a tiny flicker of hope in his eyes, and she knew. She knew she'd do it again in a heartbeat. Ma'am, Colt Maddox said, his voice rough, gravelly, as if he hadn't used it in weeks. I don't know what your intentions are, but I thank you for the kindness you've shown my boy. Up close, she could see the bruises more clearly. A split lip, a dark purple bloom spreading from his cheekbone. The way he held himself, stiff and careful, told her his ribs were injured. Someone had beaten him, badly, to make an example of him. I have a small cabin, Josie said simply, and a barn. It's not much, but you're welcome to stay, until you can get back on your feet. Noah tugged at his father's sleeve, still clutching the wooden horse. Colt bent down, and the boy whispered something in his ear. A small smile, the first she'd seen, touched Colt's lips. My son wants to know if you're an angel, he translated, a hint of embarrassment in his voice. Josie smiled back, her hand resting on her round belly. No, just someone who knows what it's like to lose everything. As they turned to leave the square, she felt Hutchkins's cold gaze on her back, like a physical weight. She had done more than buy 2 labor contracts today. She had made a powerful enemy, and she had no idea just how dangerous that enemy was. The walk to the cabin took almost an hour. The path was uneven, and Colt's injuries slowed his pace, while Josie's own pregnant gait was awkward and slow. Little Noah walked between them, sometimes whispering to his wooden horse, but never saying a word to either of them. The sun was beginning to dip below the trees when they finally reached the small clearing. It's not much, she said apologetically. She saw Colt's eyes take in the sagging porch, the patched roof, the small, struggling garden plot. It's a roof and 4 walls, he replied, his voice flat. We've had less. Noah broke away from them, walking slowly toward the cabin. He stopped at a wild rose bush near the steps, its last bloom of the season a defiant splash of pink. He touched the delicate petals with a gentle finger. He remembers his mother's roses, Colt explained, his voice suddenly soft. Sarah, she planted a garden like yours. She had a way with flowers. The barn is small, but it's dry, Josie said, pointing to the weathered building. There's clean straw inside. I have some of my husband's old clothes that might fit you. She led them into the cabin, one main room with a small sleeping alcove hidden by a faded curtain, a cast-iron stove for heat and cooking, a simple table with 2 chairs, and books. Books were stacked everywhere, on shelves, on the floor, under the bed. You're a reader, Colt observed. It wasn't a question. My husband, Thomas, he was studying law, she explained, moving to the stove to stir the banked coals. I kept his books. I'm not sure why. She busied herself, suddenly needing something to do with her hands. You must be hungry. I don't have much. Just some bean soup and cornbread from yesterday. While she warmed the simple meal, Colt helped Noah get settled at the table. The boy placed his wooden horse beside his plate, positioning it carefully, as if it were a guest for dinner. That horse is beautifully made, Josie said, setting bowls of steaming soup on the table. Sarah carved it for him, Colt said quietly. She had a gift. She could see what was hidden inside a piece of wood. They ate in silence for a while, the air thick with unspoken things. Noah ate like he hadn't seen a full meal in weeks, but he was neat, occasionally breaking off a tiny piece of cornbread and setting it in front of his wooden horse, as if feeding it too. Why did you do it? Colt asked abruptly, his spoon clattering against the bowl. Buy our contracts. You don't know us. You saw for yourself you couldn't afford it. The question didn't offend her. After months of loneliness, the blunt honesty was almost refreshing. I dreamed about you, she admitted, feeling a blush creep up her neck. Both of you. For 3 nights I saw you in the rain. I saw them dragging you. I heard Noah calling for you. Colt's expression shifted from skepticism to outright confusion. That was 2 days ago, he said slowly. Hutchins's men came for us at dawn. It was raining. I can't explain it, Josie said. Thomas always said there were more things in heaven and earth than we could understand. Maybe, maybe he's still watching over me. Noah looked up from his soup, his blue eyes intense. He whispered something to his horse, then pushed the little wooden figure a few inches across the table, toward Josie. He wants you to hold it, Colt translated, his voice filled with surprise. He never lets anyone touch it. Josie picked up the horse. It was worn smooth from being held, the craftsmanship incredible. As she turned it over in her hands, she felt a strange connection. To Noah, to the mother who had carved it, to something bigger than herself. Thank you, Noah, she said, meeting the boy's gaze. It's beautiful. The boy nodded solemnly. Then he reached out a small, hesitant hand, not toward the horse, but toward Josie's rounded belly. He looked at her, a silent question in his eyes. Yeah, she whispered. You may. As Noah's small hand rested on her stomach, the baby gave a strong, sudden kick, right against his palm. Noah's eyes went wide, and for the very first time, a real smile, bright and genuine, lit up his face. Strong baby, he whispered, so softly she almost missed it. It was the first time she'd heard him speak. The simple touch of the boy's hand, the sound of his whispered words, brought unexpected tears to Josie's eyes. After so many months of shouldering her grief alone, of carrying this child with no one to share the burden or the joy, this small moment of connection felt like a blessing. That night, after Colt and Noah were settled in the barn, Josie sat by the window, watching the stars appear one by one. The sheer recklessness of what she'd done still terrified her. But underneath the fear was a current of purpose, a feeling she hadn't had since Thomas died. If you sent them to me, she whispered to the night sky, help me understand why. Help me be what they need. The next morning she woke to the sound of hammering. She dressed quickly and stepped outside to find Colt on her roof, methodically replacing broken shingles. Noah was in the garden, carefully pulling weeds from around her cabbages, his wooden horse watching over him from a nearby stone. You don't have to do that, Josie called up to him. Colt paused, wiping sweat from his brow. Roof won't fix itself before winter, he called back. Found some tools in the barn. Thomas was always meaning to get to that, she said, a familiar pang of loss hitting her. He wasn't very handy with tools. A school teacher, you said. Yes, we both were. We were going to build a school out here, a place where any child could learn, no matter their circumstances. She touched her belly. This little one changed our plans. And then Thomas got sick. Noah appeared at her side, as silent as a shadow, holding out a small bouquet of the last wild asters from the edge of the woods. The simple act of kindness made her throat tighten. Thank you, Noah. They're beautiful. The boy nodded, then went back to his weeding, stopping every so often to whisper to his horse. He doesn't talk much, Colt said, climbing down from the roof. Not since Sarah died. That horse is about the only one he really talks to. Grief takes us all differently, Josie replied. After Thomas died, I couldn't stop talking. To him, to God, to myself, as if the words could fill the emptiness. A look of understanding passed between them, a bridge built of shared loss. She found herself telling him about Thomas, about their dreams, about the trouble they'd faced in St. Louis for wanting to teach the children of freed slaves. That's why we came west, she explained. Thomas believed the frontier needed teachers more than the cities did. And then life had other plans, Colt finished for her. Just then, Noah, who had been sitting quietly with his horse, looked up, his eyes fixed on the road leading to the cabin. His small body went rigid. Someone's coming, Colt said, following his son's gaze. A rider. Josie felt a knot of anxiety tighten in her stomach. She recognized the horseman instantly. It was Hutchins. Colt moved without a second thought, placing himself between Josie and the approaching rider. His posture was protective, a silent challenge. Noah scrambled behind his father, clutching his wooden horse like a shield. Silas Hutchkins rode into their small clearing on a gleaming black stallion that looked like it cost more than everything Josie owned. He was dressed immaculately, every inch the successful, powerful man. Only his eyes were cold, calculating. Mrs. Hartwell, he called, tipping his hat with an exaggerated politeness that felt like a mockery. I thought I should check on you after your impulsive purchase yesterday. Mr. Hutchkins, Josie acknowledged, stepping forward to stand beside Colt. As you can see, we're managing just fine. His gaze swept over the humble cabin, the patched roof, the struggling garden. It was a look of pure contempt. Indeed, I see Maddox is already making himself useful. Quite the handyman, aren't you, Maddox? A shame your skills didn't extend to managing your finances. Colt's jaw tightened, but he didn't rise to the bait. He stayed silent. I've come to make you an offer, Mrs. Hartwell, Hutchkins continued, his voice smooth as oil. I realize you acted out of some misguided sense of Christian charity, but practicality must win out. You're a woman alone, pregnant, on the edge of poverty. Taking on 2 more mouths to feed is simply unsustainable. What is the offer? Josie asked, though she had a cold feeling she already knew. I'll buy their contracts from you. $50, 10 times what you paid. A generous profit for a day's work? The money, $50 would see her through the winter. It would buy food, firewood, maybe even a doctor for the birth. It was the sensible thing to do, the logical thing. But then she felt Noah press against her skirts, his little body trembling. The wooden horse in his hands seemed to watch her, waiting. That's very generous, Mr. Hutchkins, Josie said, her voice steady. But I'm afraid I must decline. Mr. Maddox and his son are not for sale. Something dangerous flashed in Hutchkins' eyes. The mask slipped. Mrs. Hartwell, foolishness is not a virtue. A woman in your position should be focused on practical matters. Where I come from, Mr. Hutchkins, Josie replied, finding a strength she didn't know she had. We believe that faith, hope, and love are the most practical things of all. His smile was a thin, ugly line. I believe in the natural order of things. Those who are smart and work hard prosper. Those who don't, he gestured dismissively at Colt. Now they end up where they deserve to be. That's when it happened. A small voice, so unexpected it made all 3 of them jump, cut through the tension. It was Noah. Is that what happened to Judge Franklin? The boy asked, his voice clear and sharp as glass. Did he deserve what happened to him? The blood drained from Silas Hutchkins' face. He looked as if he'd been struck by lightning. What did you say, boy? Noah shrank back, his brief moment of courage gone, clearly regretting that he'd spoken. Colt moved closer to him, a protective shield. Hutchkins recovered quickly, his smooth facade snapping back into place, but his eyes were still cold with shock. Children and their imaginations, he said, forcing a laugh. Well, the offer stands. Should you come to your senses, you know where to find me. He wheeled his horse around but paused, looking down at them. A word of advice, Mrs. Hartwell. Millbrook is a small town. People talk. Associating with certain failures can make life very difficult for a newcomer. With that final threat hanging in the air, he rode away. A heavy silence settled over the small clearing. Josie knelt down in front of the boy, her heart still pounding. Noah, she asked gently, who is Judge Franklin? Colt answered for him, his expression deeply troubled. He was a circuit judge. He died last year. They said it was an accident. His horse threw him into a ravine. He knelt beside Josie, his eyes searching his son's face. Noah, why did you ask Mr. Hutchkins about the judge? Noah clutched his wooden horse tighter, shaking his head, his lips pressed together. It's all right, Josie soothed. You're safe here. You can tell us. The boy looked up at her, his eyes filled with a knowledge that was far too heavy for a child to carry. Horse told me, he whispered. Mama says, the bad man hurt the judge. Colt and Josie exchanged a look of dawning horror. A child's fantasy born from trauma? Or something else? Something terrifyingly real. Noah, Colt said carefully, his voice gentle. When does Mama talk to you? Through horse, Noah replied, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. She carved her voice into him. She says we have to help the baby lady. She says the bad man will try to hurt her too. A chill went down Josie's spine, a cold that had nothing to do with the autumn air. She had believed her dreams were a message from Thomas. But what if it was more than that? What if Sarah Maddox was also reaching out, trying to protect the family she'd left behind, trying to protect them from the man who had destroyed her life? That evening, after Noah was asleep in the barn, the weight of the day pressed down on them. The encounter with Hutchkins had changed everything. They weren't just a strange, makeshift family anymore. They were a target. I should leave, Colt said abruptly, breaking the silence. Take Noah and go. Hutchkins won't stop at threats. I won't bring his trouble to your door. And go where? Josie challenged him. With what? Winter is coming, Colt. You're still healing. I've faced worse, he insisted, but the exhaustion in his eyes told a different story. Josie went to her alcove and came back with Thomas's Bible. Did you ever read this? I'm familiar with it, he said, a weary edge to his voice, though my faith has been tested lately. Isaiah 41:10, Josie read softly. Fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. I will help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. She looked up at him. Thomas always said that God doesn't call us to safe paths, but he promises to walk the dangerous ones with us. With all due respect to your husband's faith, Mrs. Hartwell, Josie, she corrected him gently, if we're going to face danger together, we should at least be on a first-name basis. A small, reluctant smile touched his lips. Josie, my point stands. Hutchkins owns this town. He has the sheriff in his pocket. He's not afraid to use violence. He gestured to his bruised face. This wasn't the first time his men paid me a visit. Just the most public. All the more reason not to face him alone, she argued. There's strength in numbers, even small ones. He studied her then, a new look in his eyes, a look of respect. You're not what I expected, Josie Hartwell. And what did you expect? A soft city woman, someone who would crumble at the first sign of real trouble. Josie laughed, a real, genuine laugh that surprised them both. I may have come from the city, Colt Maddox, but there was nothing soft about teaching in St. Louis. I've faced down angry mobs who didn't like Thomas's ideas. This isn't my first battle. It's just a new battleground. Their conversation was cut short by a knock at the door. It was late, too late for casual visitors. Colt immediately tensed, moving to stand between Josie and the door. Who is it? He called out. Dr. Clemens, a familiar voice replied. I've brought some things for Mrs. Hartwell. Josie nodded, and Colt opened the door. The elderly doctor stood there, his arms loaded with packages. Doctor, this is a surprise, Josie said, ushering him in. Forgive the hour, he said, setting his bundles on the table. I thought it best to come after dark. Fewer curious eyes. The packages were full of food, cured ham, cheese, bread, dried fruit. He also had warm blankets and a small bottle of medicine. For your cough, he said, handing it to Josie, this damp weather isn't good for you. This is too generous, Josie protested. I can't possibly pay you. Consider it an investment in the future, the doctor said. This county needs a good school teacher more than it needs another old doctor. But that wasn't the real reason he was there. I heard about Hutchkins's visit, he said, his voice low and serious. Word travels fast in Millbrook. He offered to buy their contract, Josie explained. I said no. The doctor nodded gravely. I thought as much. That's why I'm here. You need to know what you're really up against. He turned to Colt. Maddox, you're not the first rancher Hutchkins has ruined. There have been at least 8 others in the last 2 years. Colt looked stunned. 8? I knew about a few, but the Washingtons, the Martinez family, the Keens, the Olsons, the doctor listed them off. All good, hardworking families, all suddenly hit with mysterious adjustments to their loans, all foreclosed on. It's fraud, Colt said, the word like a stone in his mouth. Yes, the doctor confirmed, but impossible to prove. Hutchkins keeps the only notary in town on his payroll. And funny enough, the county records office had a fire last spring. A lot of original documents were lost. He leaned forward, his voice dropping even lower. But there's more. Martha Keene, Henry's wife, she's been cleaning at the bank to work off their debt. She's found something. Hutchkins isn't just stealing land for himself. He's buying up specific properties for the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad. The railroad. The pieces were starting to click into place, forming a dark, ugly picture. The railroad is coming through Millbrook, Colt said, the realization dawning on him. Not just through, Dr. Clemens corrected. They're planning a major junction here, a depot. Land values are going to skyrocket once the news is public. The scope of it was staggering. Hutchkins wasn't just a greedy banker. He was a master manipulator, orchestrating a massive land grab. But why my ranch? Colt asked. It's good grazing land, but it's nowhere near a natural route for a railroad. The doctor hesitated. That's where it gets even darker. Martha found a survey map, hidden. Your property and several of the others he's taken, they sit on top of what appears to be a substantial gold deposit. Gold. The word hung in the air, heavy and unbelievable. That's impossible, Colt breathed. My family has worked that land for generations. There's no gold. Not on the surface, the doctor said. Deep veins, the kind that require industrial mining. The railroad gets the land for the tracks. Hutchkins and his silent partners get the mining rights. So he steals the land for pennies on the dollar, Josie pieced it together, then sells it to the railroad and the mining company for a fortune. And anyone who gets in his way, Colt finished grimly, ends up like Judge Franklin. Dr. Clemens looked startled. How do you know about Franklin? Noah mentioned him today, Josie explained. He said something about Hutchkins hurting the judge. The doctor's face went pale. The boy knows? How could he possibly know? He says his mother tells him things, Colt said, his voice strained, through the wooden horse she carved for him. Normally it would sound like madness, but in that quiet cabin, with the dark pressing in, none of them were ready to dismiss it. Franklin was investigating irregularities at the bank right before he died, the doctor said quietly. He'd gotten complaints. The day before his accident, he demanded to see Hutchkins's private ledgers. The implication was clear and terrifying. What do we do? Josie asked. We gather proof, Dr. Clemens said, his voice firm. Martha isn't the only one watching him. There are others. Deputy Wilson, the young deputy sheriff, he's been troubled by some of the orders he's been given. We collect every piece of evidence we can find. And then what? Colt pressed. Then, the doctor said, his eyes hard, we find a way to get that evidence to federal authorities. Someone beyond Hutchkins's reach. Because what started as a simple act of kindness, Josie, has stumbled into something much bigger. You haven't just saved one family. You may have found the only chance this entire community has to free itself from Silas Hutchkins. The next morning, an old wagon rattled up the road to the cabin. It's Pete Malloy, Colt said, recognizing the driver. Works odd jobs around town. A decent man. Pete pulled the wagon to a stop, his face etched with discomfort. The wagon bed was loaded with furniture. Chairs, a sewing basket, bundles of clothes, a child's toy chest. Got something here for you, Pete said, avoiding Colt's eyes. Hutchkins had this stuff stored in a warehouse. Told me to take what I wanted and burn the rest. Said it was clutter. A small choke sound came from Noah. He pressed himself against his father's side. These are Sarah's things, Colt said, his voice thick with a sudden raw emotion. Our things, from the ranch. He had no right. I know, Colt. That's why I brought him, Pete said. He was going to burn it all tomorrow. Noah scrambled onto the wagon, moving with unerring certainty to a small wooden box. He opened it and pulled out something wrapped in oilcloth, clutching it to his chest like a priceless treasure. Sarah's Bible, Colt explained, his voice ragged. It was her mother's. Noah's been asking for it. Pete reached into his coat. There's something else. Found these papers tucked inside, mixed in with her things. Looked important. He handed Colt a leather portfolio. Colt's hands trembled as he opened it. Inside were official-looking documents. As he read, his face shifted from confusion to disbelief to a cold, hard rage. "What is it?" Josie asked, moving to his side. "My original mortgage papers," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "The real ones." He pointed to a figure on the page. "The amount I owed, it was less than half of what Hutchkins claimed. And this," he flipped to another page, "this is a receipt for a payment I made right before Sarah got sick. A payment that should have brought my account current." "This is dated 3 weeks before the foreclosure," Josie said, her legal knowledge from Thomas's books kicking in. "If this is real, Hutchkins had no legal right to take your property." "He forged new papers," Colt said, the words like poison. "He lied. This whole thing, the auction, it was all a lie." Noah tugged on Josie's sleeve. He held out the oilcloth package he'd taken from his mother's Bible. Josie unwrapped it. Inside was a small leather-bound journal. The pages were filled with a neat, elegant handwriting. Sarah's. "What is this, Noah?" she asked gently. "Mama's secret book," the boy whispered. "She said to keep it safe until we found the angel." "The angel?" Noah nodded solemnly at her. "You, the baby lady." Colt took the journal, his hands reverent. He opened it to the first page. "April 15th, 1873, he read aloud, his voice cracking. "I am starting this record because I feel something is not right with the bank's handling of our loan. Colt is too busy with the ranch to notice the discrepancies, but the payment we made last month is not reflected in this month's statement." The journal went on, a meticulous record of Sarah's growing suspicions. She tracked every payment, every statement, every lie. Then the entries took a darker turn. "June 10th, 1873, Colt read, his voice strained. "Hutchkins came to the ranch today, while Colt was in the north pasture. He offered to forgive our entire debt if I would sign papers transferring the mineral rights to a corporation he represents. When I refused, he became angry. He said I should consider the consequences for Noah's future. The final entry, dated just days before she died, was the most chilling of all. I fear I will not live to see the truth revealed. My strength fails daily. I have hidden this journal and the evidence I've gathered, where only those who truly love me would think to look. Judge Franklin has promised to review our case next month. I pray he lives to do so." The cabin was silent. Sarah knew. All those months Colt thought she was just fading away. She was fighting. She was gathering evidence. She was trying to protect them. "There's talk in town," Pete Malloy said quietly, breaking the spell. "Martha Keene is organizing people. The family's Hutchkins hurt. They're meeting at the church social on Sunday, pretending it's just fellowship, but they're sharing information." "We'll be there," Josie said, a new resolve hardening her voice. Colt nodded, his face set like stone. Sarah started this fight. They were going to finish it. As Pete drove away, Colt knelt in front of his son. "Noah, did Mama tell you anything else? About Judge Franklin?" Noah clutched his wooden horse, his eyes serious. "She said the bad man pushed the judge off the cliff when no one was looking. She said we have to be careful, or he'll hurt us too." Sunday morning was crisp and clear. Josie dressed in her one good dress, the navy wool now straining across her belly. As she pinned her hair, she saw her reflection. 6 months a widow, 6 months pregnant, and now a key player in a conspiracy against the most powerful man in the county. What would Thomas think? He'd tell me to be brave, she thought, to stand for what's right. Noah appeared at the door, washed and clean, holding a small bouquet of wildflowers. "For church," he said shyly. "Mama always had flowers for church." Josie's heart ached with a sweet sadness. "They're beautiful, Noah." "Thank you." Colt appeared behind him, wearing Thomas's old Sunday suit. It was a little tight in the shoulders, but on him it looked distinguished. The defeated rancher was gone. In his place stood a man ready for a fight. An awkward silence fell between them. the air charged with the unspoken reality of their situation. Two strangers, two widows, building a makeshift family in the shadow of a gathering storm. Mama says to watch for the lady with the medicine bag, Noah said suddenly. What do you mean, son? Colt asked. The lady who helps sick people. She has a special bag with herbs. Mama says she knows things. Martha Keene was a nurse during the war. Josie remembered Dr. Clemens saying. It had to be her. Did Mama say anything else? Colt pressed. Noah's face was solemn. She says the bad man has eyes everywhere, and we have to be extra careful with the baby. He pointed at Josie's stomach. The baby is important. The baby is part of the plan. The church bell was ringing as they arrived in Millbrook. The churchyard was full of families in their Sunday best. As they pulled up in a borrowed cart, a hush fell over the crowd. The story of the auction had clearly made the rounds. Reverend Samuel Hayes, a kind-eyed man, greeted them warmly. Welcome, he said with a pointed emphasis. God's house is open to all his children. He gave a meaningful glance toward a group of women setting up for the social. Josie knew instantly the Reverend was one of them, an ally. As they entered the church, Noah tensed. Josie followed his gaze. Silas Hutchkins was sitting in the front pew, looking pious and powerful. Beside him sat Sheriff Morrison, his hand resting casually on his holstered pistol. They found a seat near the back. Across the aisle, a careworn woman with intelligent eyes and a small leather bag at her feet gave them a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. Medicine lady, Noah whispered. Martha Keene. The Reverend's sermon that morning was about Moses, about liberating an oppressed people from a powerful tyrant. He never looked at Hutchkins, but the banker's shoulders got tighter and tighter as the sermon went on. After the service, Martha Keene moved to walk beside Josie. The quilting circle is meeting in the basement after the social, she said quietly. We're working on a special project. We'd be honored if you join us. It was the invitation they'd been waiting for. The social was a tense dance of alliances. Families ruined by Hutchkins clustered together. Those dependent on his goodwill kept their distance. Dr. Clemens found Josie, a plate of food in his hand. You're eating for two, remember? He said with a smile. Then his voice dropped. Martha's quilting circle isn't just about evidence. She's been working with Elena Martinez. The woman claims to have gifts, a sixth sense about people. Josie thought of her dreams, of Noah's wooden horse. I'm in no position to doubt such things, she said. Their conversation was cut short. A commotion rippled through the crowd. Silas Hutchkins was walking toward them, Sheriff Morrison just a few steps behind. Mrs. Hartwell, he called out, a false, friendly smile plastered on his face. I was hoping for a word. He stopped in front of her, his presence sucking the air out of the space around them. The territorial governor is visiting next week. I thought you might appreciate an introduction. He takes a special interest in education. It was a trap, a gilded cage. That's very thoughtful, Josie replied carefully. But I'm afraid my condition makes socializing difficult. Hutchkins' smile didn't waver. I understand. However, the governor is also bringing his personal physician, a Dr. Ashworth from Vienna. Given your remote situation, I took the liberty of mentioning you. He's agreed to examine you while he's here. Just a precaution. A cold dread washed over Josie. A doctor in Hutchkins' pocket. He could declare her unfit. He could have her child taken away. Dr. Clemens has been providing excellent care, she said, her voice tight. I'm sure, Hutchkins said smoothly. But surely you wouldn't deny your child the finest medical opinion available? Before she could answer, Colt was at her side. Mrs. Hartwell's medical decisions are her own, Hutchkins. The banker's eyes hardened. Maddox, I see you found a new role. Protector. How fortunate for Mrs. Hartwell to have such dedicated staff. The insinuation was poison, meant to ruin her reputation. Mr. Maddox has been invaluable in preparing my property for winter, Josie said loudly, making sure those nearby could hear. Reverend Hayes stepped in. Indeed, Mr. Maddox has always been known for his honest labor. Our community is blessed to have him. The subtle rebuke hit its mark. Hutchkins' jaw tightened. Well then, I'll leave you to it. Dr. Ashworth will call on you on Friday, at 10 o'clock. The sheriff will escort him, as your cabin is so Isolated. The threat was clear. He had isolated her. He had set a deadline. Friday. And he was sending his own men to her door. The church basement was a council of war. Nearly 20 people were gathered around a large table covered not with quilts, but with documents. Loan agreements, deeds, bank statements, maps. "Welcome to the quilting circle," Martha Keene said with a grim smile. "We're stitching together something other than fabric." Every person in that room had lost something to Silas Hutchkins. Their stories poured out, a litany of pain and injustice. Then Colt laid Sarah's journal and the real mortgage papers on the table. A gasp went through the room. "My late wife," he said, documented his threats and his connection to Judge Franklin's death. Deputy Wilson, the young deputy, leaned forward. "Franklin was investigating the bank. The sheriff told me to back off." Martha unrolled a map. "This is from Hutchkins's office. A survey from the railroad. Every property he stole is on the planned route." She overlaid a second map. "And this one shows why. Gold. Deep veins of it, right under our land." That's when Noah spoke up, his voice clear in the stunned silence. "Mama knew. She found a funny rock in the creek. She showed it to the man who came to fix our pump, the sheriff's brother. The next week, Hutchkins came with the new papers. The connections were all there. The sheriff's brother finds gold, tells Hutchkins. Hutchkins forges documents, steals the land, and sells the rights to his partners, including the governor. And a judge who gets too close ends up dead at the bottom of a ravine. The conspiracy was bigger, darker than any of them had imagined. "But how do we get this to anyone who can help?" someone asked. "The sheriff controls the telegraph. Hutchkins has eyes everywhere." "There is a way," Deputy Wilson said. "The head railroad surveyor, a man named Marcus Webb. He's staying at the hotel. He's been asking unusual questions about banking, property transfers. It's almost like he's investigating something himself." Elena Martinez, the woman with the gifts, straightened up, her eyes unfocused. "The man with the notebook," she said softly. "He has two faces, but his heart seeks justice." It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but it was the only one they had. "Arrange a meeting," Josie said, "before Friday, before that doctor gets to my cabin." The plan was set. They would meet Webb the next day. As they left the church, a cold feeling washed over Josie. The world felt dangerous, the shadows long. As their cart rounded the final bend in the road to the cabin, Colt suddenly tensed. "Someone's been here." The cabin door was ajar. Inside, the place had been tossed. Drawers were open, books were scattered, her personal trunk had been rifled through, and the loose floorboard where they had first hidden Sarah's journal was pried up. "They were looking for the documents," Josie breathed, feeling violated and afraid. "And they didn't find them," Colt said, a grim satisfaction in his voice. "But now they know. They know we have proof." That night, as they tried to restore order, Noah looked up at them, his face strangely certain. "It's going to storm tomorrow," he announced. "A big one. Mama says we have to be ready for the thunder. And she says the baby needs to stay very quiet during the storm." The bad man is listening for her voice. Josie woke from a nightmare. Thomas and Sarah were standing on the porch of a schoolhouse, beckoning to her. Then the sky split open, and it started to rain pages from Sarah's journal, each one catching fire as it hit the ground. "The storm is coming," Thomas's voice echoed. "You must protect the child. The child is the key." She looked outside. The sky was clear, filled with stars. There was no sign of a storm, but she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that Noah was right. The storm was coming. Deputy Wilson arrived at dawn, his face grim. "Hutchkins is moving faster than we thought. He's called a town meeting for tonight, to turn the public against us. And Dr. Ashworth? He's already here. He arrived last night. He's at Hutchkins's house right now." Their timeline had just been shattered. "What about Webb?" Colt demanded. "The meeting is still on. Noon. At the hotel," Wilson said. "And get this. When I spoke to him, he asked specifically about your property, Colt. About the foreclosure. I think Elena was right. He's more than just a surveyor. They had to move. Now. Dr. Clemens would try to intercept Dr. Ashworth to buy them a few hours with a fake medical emergency. It was a flimsy plan, but it was all they had. As they gathered the precious documents, Noah came to Josie. He held out his wooden horse. "Take Mama with you," he said. "She'll help you talk to the two-faced man." Josie took the small carving, her throat tight, and tucked it safely in her bag beside Sarah's journal. The ride to town was agonizingly slow. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Wilson led them through the back entrance of Murphy's Hotel, through the bustling kitchen, and into a private dining room. Marcus Webb was waiting. He was a quiet, unassuming man, but his eyes missed nothing. "I understand you have concerns about property disputes," he said, his voice calm. "Concerns?" Josie said, her voice shaking slightly. "Mr. Webb, we have evidence of fraud, theft, and murder, all orchestrated by Silas Hutchkins." She laid it all out. The forged documents, the stolen land, the railroad conspiracy, the gold, Sarah's journal, the murder of Judge Franklin. Webb listened without interruption, his face a mask of neutrality. He examined every document, every map, his eyes sharp and focused. When he looked up, the mask was gone. "My late husband was studying law," Josie said, her voice finding its strength. "He believed justice should be for everyone, not just the powerful." A small smile touched Webb's lips. "Thomas Hartwell, I've read his work." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small leather case. He flipped it open. Inside was a badge. "Marcus Webb, Special Investigator, United States Department of Justice. I've been investigating Hutchkins and his associates for 6 months. The railroad survey was my cover." Relief washed over Josie so powerfully her knees felt weak. He was one of them. He was here to help. "Hutchkins is moving against us," Colt said urgently. "He's trying to have Josie declared unfit. He's turning the town against us." "That accelerates my timeline," Webb said grimly. "I was waiting for my colleagues to arrive from Denver, but—" He was cut off by a knock at the door. One of the other surveyors burst in. "Webb, Hutchkins and the sheriff are downstairs. They're asking for you." Webb didn't hesitate. "I need these documents, all of them," he said, stuffing Sarah's journal and the papers into his coat. "Maddox, you and the boy get out of here now." Through the kitchen. "Wilson, create a distraction." "What about Josie?" Colt demanded, his face a mask of worry. "I'll handle Hutchkins," Webb said. "Go. She's safer with me." "Go," Josie urged him. "Protect Noah." Colt nodded, his eyes locking with hers for a split second. A world of fear and trust passing between them. Then he and Noah were gone. "Stay calm," Webb murmured as footsteps approached in the hall. "Let me do the talking. Whatever happens, remember this. Justice is coming for Silas Hutchkins." The door opened. Hutchkins stood there, a predator sensing a cornered animal. Behind him, Sheriff Morrison loomed, his hand on his gun. "Mrs. Hartwell," Hutchkins sneered. "What a surprise. Dr. Ashworth has been waiting at your cabin. We were so worried." The storm had arrived, and Josie was in the eye of it. Outside, the sky had turned a bruised purple. The first rumble of thunder shook the hotel. Noah's storm was here. "I apologize for any inconvenience to the doctor," Josie said, her voice remarkably steady. "But urgent matters required my attention." "Urgent matters?" Hutchkins said, his eyes flicking between her and Webb. "Curious business for a pregnant widow with no land." "Not at all," Webb cut in smoothly. "Mrs. Hartwell holds Mr. Maddox's labor contract. She has legitimate concerns about how the railroad's plans might affect her financial arrangements." "Always the concerned citizen," Hutchkins sneered. "First saving beggars from their just debts, now meddling in business that exceeds your understanding." The condescension was a spark to dry tinder. "I may be a woman, Mr. Hutchkins," Josie said, her voice ringing with cold fury. "But my understanding extends to recognizing fraud when I see it." The air crackled. The sheriff shifted his weight. "Fraud is a serious accusation," Hutchkins said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "One that requires evidence you do not possess." "Perhaps not alone," Josie countered. "But then I'm not alone. The Keens, the Martinezes, the Olsons, they all have stories, don't they?" Disgruntled debtors, he dismissed. And Judge Franklin? Josie pressed, watching him. Was he a disgruntled debtor too? The banker's composure cracked just for a second. His death was a tragic accident. To imply otherwise is slander. No one mentioned anything but an accident, Webb observed mildly. Interesting that you would leap to that conclusion. The thunder outside was louder now, closer. Rain began to lash against the windows. The storm was breaking. Sheriff, Hutchkins said suddenly, I believe Dr. Ashworth is waiting. Perhaps you could escort him back and remind Deputy Wilson of his patrol duties. I saw him loitering downstairs. It was a clear attempt to get rid of their allies. Morrison, ever the loyal dog, nodded and left. They were alone. The mask dropped completely from Hutchkins' face. Let me be clear, he hissed, leaning toward Josie. Whatever you think you know, it won't help you. The governor is my partner. The judge is my man. By tonight, you'll be locked away in the territorial asylum. Maddox will be back in chains. And that mute boy of his will be a ward of the county. My ward. You seem very confident, Webb said calmly, for a man about to be indicted for fraud, theft, and murder. For the first time, real alarm flickered in Hutchkins' eyes. You're bluffing. Marcus Webb, United States Department of Justice, Webb said, his voice like steel. I've been building a case against you for 6 months, and today, thanks to Mrs. Hartwell, I have everything I need, including Sarah Maddox's journal detailing your threats against Judge Franklin. Hutchkins went pale. Impossible. She was dying. Yet she found the strength to write down your every word, Josie said. Every threat, every lie. He was cut off by a commotion from downstairs. The door burst open. It was Sheriff Morrison, his face panicked. Hutchkins, we've got trouble. Federal marshals just rode into town. They're at the bank. And Maddox is showing those papers to everyone. Hutchkins' eyes darted to Webb. You planned this. Justice moves at its own pace, Webb said. Arrest them, Hutchkins shrieked at the sheriff. Arrest them both. Morrison hesitated, his hand hovering over his gun. Silas, federal marshals. Do I need to remind you about your brother? Hutchkins hissed. The gold. If I go down, you all go down. Now do your duty. That did it. Morrison drew his pistol. You're under arrest, both of you. The standoff was broken by a small figure slipping through the door. It was Noah. He ran straight to Josie, his wooden horse clutched in his hand. Noah, what are you doing? Josie gasped. Mama said to bring her, he said, pressing the horse into her hands. She said the bad man needs to see. You hurt my mama, Noah said, turning to face the stunned banker. You pushed the judge off the cliff. She saw you. The ravings of a disturbed child, Hutchkins roared, but he was trembling. Mama carved a special place, Noah said, his voice ringing with truth. In the horse's belly, for the things she saw. Josie's fingers flew over the smooth wood. She found it, a nearly invisible seam. She pressed. A small compartment popped open. Inside was a tightly folded piece of paper. Give me that! Hutchkins lunged, but Webb intercepted the paper, unfolding it. It was a letter in Sarah's hand, dated 3 days before her death. Webb read it aloud. I, Sarah Elizabeth Maddox, being of sound mind though failing body, hereby testify that on April 12, 1873, I witnessed Silas Hutchkins push Judge William Franklin from Lookout Ridge. I have lived with this knowledge, fearing for my family's safety. Now, as death approaches, I entrust this testimony to whoever finds my son's wooden horse, praying it reaches those who can bring justice to our community. The room was dead silent, save for the storm and Hutchkins's ragged breathing. Lies, he croaked, but his voice had no conviction. The door opened again. Colt stood there, flanked by Dr. Clemens and Deputy Wilson. Behind them stood the faces of the quilting circle. It's over, Hutchkins, Colt said, his voice cold as a grave. The federal marshals have your real ledgers, and they have sworn statements from 17 families. It was then that Hutchkins finally broke. With a guttural scream of rage, he lunged for Josie, pulling a tiny derringer from his coat. If I'm finished, so are you, he snarled, aiming the pistol right at her pregnant belly. Everything happened at once. Noah screamed and threw himself in front of her. Colt launched himself across the room. Webb tackled Hutchkins. A deafening crack echoed in the small room. Josie felt Noah's small body jerk against her. She heard Colt's anguished cry. "Noah!" She dropped to her knees beside the boy. Blood was spreading across his shirt. So much blood. "No, please, God, no!" Colt was there, gathering his son into his arms, his face a mask of pure terror. Noah's eyes fluttered open. Did I save the baby?" he whispered. "Mama said I had to." Dr. Clemens pushed through. "Let me see him." He ripped the shirt aside. The wound was ugly, bleeding freely, but it was on his shoulder. "He'll be all right," the doctor said, his voice choked with relief. "The bullet grazed him. He'll need stitches, but he'll recover." Relief crashed over Josie, so intense it made her dizzy, and right behind it came a different kind of pain. A sharp, insistent cramping that seized her, radiating from her back to her abdomen. Her water broke in a sudden, warm rush. "The baby," she gasped, clutching her belly as the first real contraction hit her like a physical blow. "It's coming. Now!" Chaos erupted. Hutchkins was dragged away in handcuffs by the marshals. Dr. Clemens stitched up Noah's shoulder, while Martha Keene and Elena Martinez cleared the dining table, covering it with clean linens. "There's no time to move her," Martha said, her nursing experience taking over. "This baby is coming fast." The storm outside raged, a symphony of thunder and driving rain. Inside, Josie fought her own storm, her body racked with pain. "I can't," she gasped. "I can't do this." "Yes, you can," Colt said, his hand gripping hers, his voice a lifeline. "You're the strongest person I know, Josie Hartwell." As another wave of pain crashed over her, the world seemed to fade. She saw them then, standing in a place of golden light, Thomas healthy and smiling, and beside him, Sarah Maddox, beautiful and serene. "You've done so well," Thomas said. "The hardest part is over." "Now you must complete what we began," Sarah added. "A family, born of sorrow, but destined for joy." The vision faded. "Push now, Josie," the doctor urged. "The baby's head is crowning." With one final monumental effort, Josie pushed as lightning lit up the room. And then, above the fury of the storm, came a new sound, a thin, reedy cry, growing stronger with every breath. "It's a girl," Martha announced, tears streaming down her face. "A perfect baby girl." The doctor wrapped the tiny infant in a tablecloth and placed her on Josie's chest. The storm outside began to quiet. The thunder receded. The rain softened. And through a break in the clouds, a single shaft of sunlight broke through the window, illuminating the mother and her newborn child. Noah, pale but beaming, touched the baby's tiny hand. Her fingers curled around his. "She knows me," he whispered in awe. "What will we name her?" Colt asked, his voice thick with unshed tears. Josie looked at Colt, at Noah, and at the tiny miracle in her arms, born of a storm, a symbol of everything they had fought for. "Sarah," she said without hesitation. "Sarah Hope." In the end, justice came for Silas Hutchkins. The evidence was overwhelming. He would spend the rest of his life in a federal prison. The land was returned to its rightful owners. And for Josie, Colt, Noah, and little Sarah Hope, a new life began. They went back to Colt's ranch, not just as friends, but as a family, pieced together from broken parts but stronger for it. On a hill overlooking the valley, where Sarah Maddox had once tended her roses, they built a school, the Hartwell Maddox School of Opportunity, a place born from a dream, funded by justice and built by a community that had learned to fight back. Josie stood on its steps on opening day, baby Sarah on her hip, Colt by her side, and Noah running with the other children, his laughter ringing out clear and free. The scar on his shoulder was a reminder not of what they had lost, but of what they had saved. Their story became a quiet legend in that small corner of Missouri. A story of how a pregnant widow with $5 and a dream walked into the darkness and brought the light. A story about how the love of a mother can reach across death itself, speaking through a small wooden horse to bring down a tyrant and build a future. It's a story that reminds us that even in the face of overwhelming evil, courage, community, and hope can change the world. If you were moved by this story of incredible bravery and the fight for justice, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more true tales of the human spirit. And let me know in the comments below. What do you think was the most powerful force in this story? A mother's love, a stranger's kindness, or a community's courage?